this issue. He spoke about the issues that they'll be testing us within, and the things that are going to be brought out to the forefront. So he was discussing about LGBTQ, and he was talking about the legislation that is being passed around the world, not in just the USA, but around the world as well, and how it's being sort of really agitated and brought to the forefront. And we need to understand where we stand as we approach the Sunday Law Waymark. He spoke about the issues that were brought out, which were culture wars, political battles, legislators around the various countries, where it sort of boils down to, and it's, you know, from the USA, which is leading to the trotting down of democracy, and where, you know, there's patriarchal oppression, and also to do with the tending issue, which is gender equality. And of course, he spoke about the degrees of inspiration, where there were two types of prophets. He said there's prophets from the movement, from the stone of Daniel, 144,000. And also he spoke about the journalists, which Elder Perminder brought out, which from the news, which is also, you know, we can, when we read about the news, we hear about the agitation through that, through these laws, through the journalists. He also spoke about the Levites and Nephilims, that he said that they're not going to be developed by us per se, but they are going to be developed through the messages, through the journalists, and it's that's helping them to develop them. He spoke about the Sunday law crisis, and then he brought up about the striking down of Roe versus Wade, and also oppressive state powers, and he spoke about, and he likened it, all these battles, to the fulfillment of the Battle of Raphia. I'm just trying to think what else he spoke about, because he spoke about the Syrian war, and Panium as well. And of course, you know, we're going to be through this battle, we're going to be identifying characters through the conflict.
Debbie?
Yeah, LGBTQ rights, equality. He spoke about 2019 Project Blitz, and things like that. It's part of the Christian, and he spoke about Dominion organisations, which were founded in 2016. He spoke about Christian rights, how they were framing that model through legislation and bringing out religion in schools, which are anti-LGBTQ. And also he said that there's a website called ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union. And what that website does, it tracks down legislation which are which are anti-LGBTQ. And we found that there was 435 pieces of anti-LGBTQ laws that are being processed right now.
Debbie?
Yeah.
There's no law, that there's not 400 laws being processed.
Sorry, there was 400. Well, there was 400 pieces.
There's bills, but they're not all being made into law.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah. That's what
I just mentioned something else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just in the last video that you did, also we mentioned that I didn't agree with the
subversion of democracy.
Tabro's take on the fall of democracy. I agree on that it may look different, and we need to ponder on that. And I think Elder Perminder said it was, what was the word? Undermining democracy. So it's not the fall of democracy. And then one other thing. I can't remember the other thing. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, he spoke about undermining of democracy, but he said that the two parties think that they've got a right understanding of democracy, didn't they?
Yeah. So they're both
you know, they think they've got the right understanding of democracy. which I thought was an important part, because I didn't really sort of see that at the time.
Democracy is not falling. Just want to make that clear.
No, so undermining it then. We'll say undermining then. And that was it. And he spoke about patriarchal constitution that creeps towards the Sunday law. And we need to understand by what's going on. We need to sort of have an understanding of the legislation that is being targeting against these people. So I think that's about it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
I just wanted to add also that I think Curtis and I were having a chat here live on the video about, we noticed things that happen at a state level, like it did with Roe v. Wade, even though that was overturned, they threw it back to the state level. So yeah, all these things are being passed because each different states are having control of what they're doing. So we need to be watching the state level at a state level.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Natalie. So if everybody's okay with that, we're going to look at the next 20 minutes of what Elder Tabo is going to bring out, and he's going to speak about now more about trans here. And I think it's a good subject because there was something I wanted to understand about that, what I'm going to bring out through the discussions. So we're going to listen to that now for another 20 minutes, and then I'll stop it. I'll stop the video, and then we're going to discuss what he spoke about during that time. Okay, so I'm going to press the video now.
Such as birth certificates and driver's licenses and so on. And this puts transgender people at risk of losing jobs, of facing harassment and being harmed in other ways. Trans, intersex, and non-binary people need IDs that accurately reflect who they are in order to travel, in order to apply for jobs and enter public establishments without the risk of harassment or harm, right? So that very basic human necessity, they need to have accurate identification documentation, which can complicate your life, you know, in serious and unforeseen ways. If you don't have it, or if you don't have it properly representing who you are, that is one of the prongs, that is one of the targets, that's one of the ways in which the swarm of legislation is targeting and suppressing people from the trans community. Another focus of the legislative attacks is civil rights. So with increasing frequency, what we've been seeing is individuals and institutions claiming a right to discriminate by refusing services to women and people from the LGBTQ community based on religious objections, right? And we've discussed this a lot. Elder Tess has definitely spoken about it, where there's a shifting of the goalposts that is taking place, that the dominionists have been subtly but effectively promoting, where freedom of religion is not simply the right to believe what you want to believe. It's not simply the right to believe what you want to believe within your own self and practice within the limits of your sphere of action, your religion, right? They're extending the notion of religious freedom to include the right to discriminate against others on the basis of your personally held religious beliefs, regardless of whether they share those religious beliefs or not. Freedom of religion now means that, you know, if I don't believe in birth control, right? And if I own a pharmacy, I can turn away women who are seeking to fill birth control prescriptions. Right? You are imposing your religious belief on that person in a way that is suppressing them, that is oppressing them. Or if you own a bridal salon or a photo studio or a reception hall, and you decide to close your doors to same-sex couples, you know, who want to have a function or a wedding, because of your beliefs, right? They are not, you are imposing your religious beliefs on them in a way that is oppressing them, right? You're seeing religiously affiliated schools firing women because they became pregnant while not married, right? And you have a lot of these schools, you know, being funded by the state, but are right, being funded by the state and should be accountable to the state to act in a way that is, you know, that recognizes the separation of church and state, if I may put it that way. But you do see these things, right? You see business owners refusing to provide insurance coverage for contraception for their employees. You see graduate students training to be social workers, refusing to counsel gay people, right? And I want us to see that the ID issue is one thing. It may affect you, but it won't. It may place unfair hurdles in your life, but it won't. It may not stop you or prevent you from being able to go on with your life, right? It may impose unfair hurdles, and it can make life more dangerous for you. But say, you know, you can get on with it. You can, but then you add the civil rights issue. Then it's affecting you in other additional ways. Then you add the other issues that we're going to cover cumulatively in terms of the impact that these issues, that all these oppressive enactments are going to have on your life. Cumulatively, it becomes grinding, it becomes crushing. It's like there then becomes no element, no aspect, no arena of your life that is unaffected by it, right? And all of it is communicating, emphasizing the idea that you are a second-class citizen and you don't have the same rights as everyone else, right? So, you know, there's the cumulative effect when you think of how all these things would affect someone. And the ACLU's notes on this section does make the point I just made, which is that religious freedom in America means that we all have a right to our religious beliefs, but this does not give us the right to use our religion to discriminate against and impose those beliefs on others who do not share them. Right, so when you look at the anti-LGBTQ bills that are being passed that touch on civil rights, they are attempting to undermine and weaken non-discrimination laws by allowing employers, businesses, and even hospitals to turn away LGBTQ people or refuse them equal treatment. All right, so the next column that, you know, that this swarm of legislation falls under is targeting free speech and expression. So despite the safeguards of the First Amendment's right to free expression, politicians are fighting to restrict how and when LGBTQ people can be themselves, limiting access to books about them, and trying to ban or censor performances like drag shows. If you've been following the news cycle, even here in Canada, drag shows are the latest whipping horse of, right-wing conservative media, right? And it's always framed as this is being done to protect children, right?
Elder Tabo,
Yes.
forgive me to interrupt. Is Annabelle waiting to get in? She went out, but she's trying to get back in and isn't able.
I just let them in.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat. Carlton, you asked me to repeat. What would you like me to repeat?
It was a part about where you were talking about.
Sorry, you're very faint.
Sorry, the religious belief imposing on others. You were given an example of. You were given an example of being a pharmacy at a pharmaceutical, and somebody who wants to have abortion comes to buy abortion pills, and you don't give it to them. So I'm thinking, my question was like, if he's not religious, I'm trying to figure out how he's imposing on that person.
Well, that's what's been happening. Say I'm a woman. I'm not. I don't believe abortion is a sin, and you're a pharmacist behind the counter, and you believe abortion's wrong. And because I believe abortion's wrong, it is legal, right? People have a right to abortion, or at least should. And then because I feel it is wrong, I refuse to provide you with a public legal service, a legal service, right? That is available to the public. I'm limiting your access to something you have a right to, because I don't believe it's right. Right. It's the same thing with the right, the stories about gay couples looking for wedding cakes to be baked for them, and then the bakery says, I don't believe in I don't believe in gay marriage, so I'm not going to bake the cake. You're offering a service to the public, and you're going to deny that service to a person because you don't agree, because of your religious beliefs about their lives, right? It's always interesting with that one because I guess I had the thought, so if they found out that someone is an adulterer, that they've cheated on their spouse or something like that, would they refuse to bake the cake? If they found out that someone was a thief at some odd time, whatever the case may be, would they refuse to bake the cake? Generally, no. They don't make that their business. They don't make such questions their business about a person's life. It's a business transaction. A business transaction offered to the public, right? But on this issue, they treat it differently, right? So, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So they definitely, you just need to Google. These are things that there are always new instances popping up, and they get taken to court, or they make the news, and so on and so forth. So these are things that are happening. So we're talking about free speech and expression. Right, we've seen how trans people are the latest whipping horse of the right-wing media, framing transgender people as predatory, framing their drag shows as scenes where children are groomed in inappropriate ways. And all this is, it's playing out in the culture wars. All this is angling towards fomenting hatred against them. Right, it's the latest issue that is uniting the right, and galvanizing them to action. So,
could I comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Could I just comment on that remark? Religious right, yes, being galvanized on the issue regarding LGBTQ, but it should also be noted that in terms of the spectrum of gender orientation, a lot of gay people are rising up against trans people. And I mean, it was there before, in previous years, but it's really starting, and I'll use your word, it's really starting to galvanize a lot of homosexuals and binary people are rising up to bring forth a narrative. The TQ part they want to cut off. LGB, lesbians, gays, homosexual men, and binary, both sexes, it's fine. But in essence, what they're arguing is very similarly to the religious right. It's simply binary. Male, female, and those who like both. And they're wanting to truncate trans people because they believe as well, and I'm not saying this is all gay people, but there's a segment within the, I'll call it the gay movement, homosexual movement, that is wanting to distance themselves from transgender people. And so what Elder Tess had said is there is a lot of animosity by homosexuals against transgender individuals. And so they're, in essence, supporting the same narrative that the religious right is, coming from a little different perspective, perhaps. I just wanted to note that.
And yes, I've definitely observed, the gay people who are also adopting the right-wing talking points and narratives about trans people. And it's also feminists, people who present themselves as feminists, who've been very vocal and prominent in terms of forwarding the narrative that trans women aren't women, and we ought to protect real women's spaces from trans women. There's also a segment of purported feminists who are taking up the same line. I think
Yes.
one prominent one is, yes.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna
No.
agree. And feminists that are not necessarily, well, they definitely aren't radical feminists. They're liberal feminists. They want to retain femininity. They see nothing wrong with it, and they don't like any kind of quote unquote anti-men kind of insinuation. I mean, it's a wrong interpretation of radical feminism. But yes, it's feminists, but in name only. They're not the radical feminists. So go ahead with your example. Forgive me, you were going to suggest somebody by name.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. No.
Okay, we're going to stop it there. And I'm going to open up now with what, for those last 20 minutes or so, what was Elder, what did you understand that, what points that Elder Tagger was trying to say? Oh, hello?
Oh, done. So,
Hello?
We can hear you, Deb.
Oh, you can hear me. It's all right.
Yeah,
Right, I'm leaving. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I heard something then. Yeah, so the last 20 minutes that we've just played, what do you understand, or how would you, discuss what points that was drawn out with those last 20 minutes? What sort of things did he highlight that sort of that you want to discuss or bring out? Opening that to everybody. For me, I think what I wanted to focus on was the trans people and what's going around them. And I did some sort of deep investigation about what's going on with that. Why is it? I mean, we know that there's anti-LGBTQ, but why particularly are trans being targeted or, singled out, not only by LGB people, like that gentleman rightly said, but also politically, and also by the right, and also by liberal feminists. So what do you think is happening? Why are trans people sort of singled out here? Because when you think about it, LGBT people are receiving the same oppression as everybody else. So why are they all these different of it? Why are they all singling trans people? We'll start off with that before I go deeper into talking about what he brought out. So can we start with answering that question?
Hi, Debbie. I think I had a similar question to you.
Yes.
I think I just wanted to add that, from my understanding, it's not just liberal feminists that have a problem with trans, but actually I find radical feminists also have that issue. I mean, I've got an aunt
radical feminists
actually,
do as well.
Yeah, I've got an
Right,
aunt
okay.
who's a radical feminist, and she was actually quite prominent in some of the movements in the UK early on in like the 60s and so on, 60s and 70s.
Who did you say? Who was that?
It's my aunt.
Oh, right. Got
Yeah,
you, right.
yeah.
Okay.
I was actually visiting with her last weekend.
Yeah.
And she mentioned that she has no problem if like a man wants to put on like women's clothes and things like that. So she's a radical feminist, but she was saying that it's almost like incongruent having like a man who's kind of gone through like puberty as a man to then be considered a woman after transitioning. And yeah, so I'll just add into your question in terms of I think there's a bit of incongruence between different views within some of these, between like radical feminists and the trans, and then also adding to, she also had a problem with the drag, as Tabo mentioned, in terms of you have these men dressing up as women and like playing these caricatures, and they can be quite stereotypical.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to the minstrelsy of like white men or white people dressed up as black and playing these very stereotypical roles, I think it you know, even she you know, she brought that out, like, why do we think it's okay for men to do that to women? And I think somewhere, in my opinion, I feel like there's incongruence between certain aspects of when you talk about LGBTQI and so on. Plus, I think we talk about them as if they're just one harmonious group, but there's actually quite a bit of incongruence between them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. Yeah,
It reminds me sometimes of like Protestantism. It's like, okay, Protestantism are united. They're united, you know, as Protestants against Catholicism. But when you look within them, there's actually quite a variety of different groups, and you can't, at least from my view, you can't just lump them all like in one big box and think they all see the same and get on.
Exactly, that's what I understood. I thought, you know, because I was sitting here trying to understand why are they all coming against trans people? Because what he brought out about, you know, how they obviously while they're transitioning, they want to be understood by, you know, if they're a man, they want to be known as a woman. So so when they're transitioning, they obviously want the IDs, and they need the IDs to be able to live and to work and to do other things. And, you know, I just thought, gosh, you know, these people at the top, they're trying to just totally eradicate these people from the face of the earth, because if they haven't got IDs where they can work and they can have driving license, birth certificates and they can, you know, apply for going abroad, you know, and jobs even, you know, what is it that they want from these people? You sort of think to yourself, right, if they're going to take out all these IDs, what is going to be left for these people to do? You know what I mean? So what is the overall aim of the people at the top there trying to stop them having these IDs? Do they want them to just go back and accept that they can't change? You know, what is it that they want from these people? Can I put that to everybody? So if they take away all their IDs, so they can't work, they can't have jobs, what is it that the political world, what is it that they want from them at the end of the day? Do they want to totally eradicate them from the face of the earth so they as if they don't exist? So what is their, you know, ultimate aim by doing all this? Because they are definitely oppressing these people, and they're trying to find ways to oppress them. So when I looked deeper into it, even though it wasn't brought out here, I started looking into how, you know, where I wanted to pinpoint where this suppression sort of came on trans. And the only thing I could sort of find really was when it came to sports. That's when I thought that it first came out, when they started saying, you know, we don't want, you know, men as women. We don't think it's fair that they're starting in our sport. So for me, I think that's when it was sort of got blown out of all proportion, and all that sort of stuff. So basically, I looked deeper into trans, and I wanted to know why people were why they were sort of singled out more than anybody else. And then I started looking at the, you know, I was reading what trans people were saying, how, especially about the drag, and they were saying that's their way of expressing themselves and things like that. So it made me look at the First Amendment, and I'm thinking, what does the First Amendment say? And so the First Amendment says, of the Constitution, says the First Amendment to the United States Constitution prevents the government from making laws that regulate an establishment of religion, or that prohibit the free exercise of religion, or abridge the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the freedom of assembly, or the right to petition the government or redress of grievances. So, you know, when you look at all these things about the First Amendment, you think, well, what do they, the government, what do they think this First Amendment, how do they understand the First Amendment, especially when they are suppressing trans people? Right, does anybody else want to add anything about what we've just discussed?
Just one comment.
Yeah.
You said that they're taking away people's IDs. I don't believe they're taking away anybody's IDs.
No, well, they're not giving, yes, that's what I meant to say. They don't want to issue them.
They're not, so they're not stopping people getting jobs or traveling. They're not preventing any of those normal activities of life. What they're saying is
they won't want to do it.
They're not going to change their IDs.
Right. That's what I meant to say.
I'm not saying it's not a significant issue, but it's not the same issue as that you suggested, that they're restricting people, because they're not doing that.
Right.
And Elder Tabo mentioned, or someone else mentioned in that presentation, about the equivalency or lack thereof of when white people do blackface.
Hmm.
And they would argue that it's their First Amendment right to do that. So I wonder what your thoughts are about white people doing blackface and men, cis men, dressing up as stereotypical women. Do you see an equivalency there, or you don't?
When the trans people say they want the freedom of expression, how do we understand that?
Drag is not normally trans people. It doesn't necessarily
Okay.
mean they're trans people.
So it's
Cis
not-
men do drag acts.
Right. Hmm.
So you spoke about the First Amendment right for a man to dress up as a woman and go onto stage.
Hmm.
But is it a First Amendment right for a white person to put on blackface and mimic black people?
Right. Okay.
That was a question to you. I wasn't.
No, I don't know to answer that. Sorry. I don't know. Maybe everybody else can answer it. I don't know.
No one's going to answer, so you can carry on.
Right. Okay. What I did was I actually I was looking at there's a late, well, a trans man, and he was she was asked to represent them in the court, not in the courts, in the assembly, and her name was Helena, and she's a Democrat. All we know, her name is Helena, and she's a Democrat, and she was talking about how she was actually elected by the people in Montana to fight the causes for their children who are transitioning through trans. And basically she said that when she went there, she was fighting for the children, and she obviously she wanted to represent them. And she spoke about how the reps are going to have blood on their hands because of the laws that they're bringing out to try and suppress youth by having this puberty blockers, and also reassignment surgeries and gender affirming care. So she was speaking up against all these things, for the trans youth. And she said, and she was asked, what do you mean by that they are going to have blood on their hands? And she said, well, if they're going to stop the children from transitioning, she said a friend of hers spoke about how a child, transgender child, was looking at these things, these laws going through on the TV, and it made her feel suicidal because what they're trying to do. So for me, when I looked at this, I looked at how deeply these issues are becoming for the youth, and they're even trying to, in Florida, they're even trying to stop adults from having transgender surgery from adulthood. And this particular person, he was a Republican, his name was Jay Ashcroft. He actually is putting that law out there where he wants to try and stop adults from having transgender resurgery. So it made me look deeper into things to think, my goodness, they really are really sort of oppressing them and trying, every kind of way to do it. And I think when I looked into some areas that they're trying to arouse people's minds to this, is there was an issue where a transgender did something violent, and I can't remember exactly what the case was about, but they really blew it out of proportion, so much so it brought fear into people's minds, especially women. And so I don't know if that was a deliberate tactic of the right to do this, but I know that they use that tactic to instill fear into the minds of people, so much so that it caused them to discriminate against trans people, because they blew this situation out of proportion. Everybody does violent crimes, men, males, women, but they just happen to say, oh, it's a trans person who did this. And so it was all brought out of proportion. So for me, when I did hear this, it's almost like they use this tactic to discriminate against trans, but they used it, directed the people's minds through fear to discriminate against them. Really, for me, I thought that was a little hidden agenda, so that they could use some kind of weapon against them. I don't know how you people feel about that, or if you think I'm right about that, but that's how it looked to me. Does anybody want to discuss what I just said, or do they have any other ideas?
I was going back to what you asked at the beginning, I think, which was, why do we think they're targeting trans as opposed
Yes,
to...
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was my question. Yeah.
I was thinking that when you're lesbian or gay, you still stick to your gender birth assignment. And I think one of the issues seems to be that because trans people are crossing the gender, it's not binary gender, that it seems, obviously people are afraid of that. It's more of a threat. And we're looking at, past histories where they just come together because they're afraid. But it seems an excuse to target that group because they
who are they, please?
Trans people.
Who are they? Who are they?
Target trans people.
Who are they that are targeting them?
I guess Debbie's point is that people, these laws or people in this is what I was just saying about,
or just LB
politics and other groups targeting trans people, because they're coming to the forefront at the moment, unlike this shooting that was a trans person. But I suppose the right-wing agenda is what I was thinking, more targeting trans people. And perhaps it's because they can use that as an argument to say that it's taking away the rights of women. I was just looking at an opinion piece in The Economist, and it's saying that all trans people should be given human rights. However, when it comes to benefits, that trans women, some of the benefits afforded to females, for instance, access to sex segregated spaces and resources, it seems to remove some benefits and even rights from females. This is what they're arguing in this thing, because it's crossing that binary gender line. So they're making that an argument to say that it's a threat to females, like you use the sports, or even the same toilets, the same changing rooms, those kind of things. It's because it's not sticking to birth assigned gender. And I don't know whether that's one of the reasons they can use that as an easy target to say this is a violation of rights for women, and that's why radical feminists or gays and lesbians will be arguing against trans, because it's a violation of their faith. I'm not sure if that's one reason.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking deeper into, you see. I was trying to find the answer to that part. Why, when I started reading about it, I thought, what is it that they're singling out? And I wanted to pinpoint where did it start from. And then when I listened to this this representative, she's a Democrat, Helena, and she's actually trans, and she said she was elected by the people of Montana to stand up for their children who are trans as well. And she said she felt it was very much from when they started accessing sports. She felt that that's where it was heightened from. So I thought that was interesting, and then it sort of took up from there. So
I think it comes from Babylon, or the Tower of Babel, is it?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. If you're going to go deeper, yeah.
I think it's all about sexism at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not just about politics and far right. I think it's also about the culture that's been around since way back. It looks like it's religious, which it will be, but it's also culture. Where do they get there? Why do they want it so badly their way? It's all to do with sexism and how the culture and how
Okay. Tom, do you have any other comments to make about this as well? Or anybody else? I can't think who was out there.
Not from sports. That's what I wanted to say. Didn't stem from sports.
Right. No, I'm going by what this lady was saying. She felt, the trans lady, Helena, she felt that that's where it started from. That's what I was commenting about. Does anybody else?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think. Okay.
Go on, Tom.
No, I think some good points have been highlighted. Like Emma mentioned some, I mentioned some, other Paminda mentioned some, but it feels like I'm not entirely sure what we're saying, what our position is, or whether we're like, oh, there's these issues and where there's conflicts in views, but we don't actually have a stance on them. For example, I feel, at least myself, I don't think drag is just comparing and contrasting blackface and drag. I don't think it's good, but I'm not sure if that's like our view, or maybe I need educating otherwise. But then on some of the other points in terms of how radical feminists can feel about like
Wait, Tom, you saying it's not good to contrast them, or it's not good to do drag? Sorry, I just want
it's not good to do drag.
Oh, it's not good to do drag because of the contrast.
That's my opinion. Yeah. From what I understand, from what I can see,
because they're the same similar issues. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why men should be allowed to that. Yeah, I think it's quite damaging. You know, it's got the same issues as blackface, where I'm sure back in the day they were like, yeah, no, we're just joking, we're just having a good time, but it's still propagating these stereotypes. And the same thing with drag nowadays, especially when it's, you know, with cis men. I think it's got similar problems. But I'm not sure where we stand on the other issues. I think we've mentioned that a couple of times, that, you know, this group doesn't, you know, has this conflict with this other group and so on and so forth. But what do we feel? What do we believe about those issues?
Go on.
I wasn't going to answer that question, but I wanted to speak to the point that Debbie made when she quoted that, I think, Congress woman about men or trans men in sports. I think the point that Debbie was making is correct. We could argue that everything goes back to the fall of humanity back in the day, but I think so many, rightly or wrongly, so many people saw the unfairness of essentially a man who has begun a transition to become a woman, competing in high-level sports with a physical advantage over women. And the way it was portrayed, it polarized people's thoughts on the legitimacy of doing that. And I think the point that Debbie was making was the correct one, that seems to be a present catalyst that projected this whole idea into the consciousness of society. Because I think lots of people see the unfairness of that. And as soon as you use that, you can end up using a straw man technique and basing all your other fears and worries on that idea. So I think it's a valid point. Obviously, this issue has been going on for a long time, but it's become prominent. And the thing that has been prominent in the news is this idea of men who are physically still men, really, with respect to their physical size and their body strength, competing against women, and people addressing what they think is the fairness of that, and then everything else gets lumped into it, as you've intimated.
Okay, thank you.
At the moment, from what you're saying, if I understand correctly, are you saying that because there seems to be this unfairness of someone who's grown up as a man and had whatever you call it, like developmental advantage or whatever word or whatever we want to use against women, then it's used as a strawman technique to then deny the legitimacy of a man transitioning to be a woman?
I think that's how people view it. Yes, it's seen as the term an entering wedge. It seems as an entering wedge that where will this end? And then obviously, I posted an article recently about religion and people's views on religion, which is dealing with the subject of organized religion. And part of the point that was being made is that America is a religious country, even though organized religion is not doing too well nowadays. And that idea that it's a Protestant land or a Christian land is based upon Judeo-Christian theology, ideology. And part of that is Adam and Eve really existed and there was a fall of humanity. So it's all about men and women. So there is an inherent fear, and I think Emma brought this point up, that there's a difference between someone who is homosexual and someone who is trans. How they view their physical body, their sex as it was assigned at birth. So they're viewed very differently. And I think it people have an inherent fear of something that is, in their view, anti-God, anti-religion, which then becomes anti-society. And when people, and I'm not making a judgment on it, but when people say, well, that just seems unfair, they can piggy bank all of their other fears onto that one. Just like if there was I don't know, a judo competition or a boxing competition, and there was a featherweight fighting a heavyweight, everybody would say, well, that's just inherently not going to work, because the smaller fighter doesn't have the reach, doesn't have the weight, doesn't have the strength, so they will definitely lose. And people use those kind of equivalencies when trans men are trying to compete against women, especially when it be on a professional basis. So they have this idea that of inherent unfairness, and then that just feeds into this fear, this religious fear, that society is going to be turned upside down by people changing the order of God. I think that I'm not saying everybody would view it that way, but that's how they kind of view it, I think.
It's that bit like wearing trousers in the movement, that fear of where this was going to lead. A bit like that.
I don't think I can hear you.
Speak up now.
It's all right.
Oh,
So would you say that this is based on fear then?
well, it certainly stirs up fear, it seems to me.
It's definitely stirring it up, because I think that's what, I don't know if that's, like I said before, I don't know if that's the right agenda, or if it was just, it just happened to just happen, because they are, sort of bringing it out of proportion. So I don't know if that was their agenda to do that in the first place, and really it's hidden under the discrimination that they've got against them. That's the point I was trying to bring out, I think. I don't know if that was right or not. Go on, Ashley, what were you going to say? Or whoever was going to say something.
I was talking about the fear whilst you're talking about what you said.
Well, when I was talking about when a trans person bought an act, a violence act, that I read something where it was really brought out of proportion, then women started to get frightened about men being in the toilets, bathrooms and all that sort of stuff. And I think that was a discriminatory. I thought that the right was sort of blowing it out of proportion to cause the fear into people's minds, and that's how they were trying to hide the discrimination that they had towards them.
With regards to what else Paminda said with what was it? I wanted to mention the fear bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the point obviously was correct that it is obvious that men, it did look unfair, and they did use it as a straw man tactic, that we can use this as an excuse because we see what's coming, and fear of what is coming. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I do, yeah. And they were trying to, I think that it was sort of hidden, their discrimination was sort of hidden through this fear that they're putting in the people's minds. I don't know, that's how I was.
You're saying the fear is coming from the sports situation and the
and other things, and also bringing and also the violence that, when they convicted a trans person of doing something. I can't remember what it was. It's almost like they're trying to put this fear into people, or blowing it out of proportion more than normal, really, and their gender sort of really hidden under the discrimination that they have against them. That's how I saw it. Does anybody else have any other issues or that we can discuss that Elder Tabo brought out in those first 20 minutes? Can anybody, I mean, for me, I wanted to understand more about trans and what issues were going on with that. And I think we discussed that today, and why they're really sort of highly discriminated against. So does anybody else want to bring out any other issues?
Why do lesbian, bisexual, queer people, I think they say,
Was it LGB and
yeah,
LGB?
why are they so threatened by transgender people? Anyone know? Why don't they like?
I think well, it's like Tom said, that they don't believe that they really are women. They don't represent women. So I know that's for the liberal feminists. They don't represent women. Why LGBT do? That's the part I'm trying to understand. Do they feel the same way? Maybe they feel they're not really women. I don't really know what the serious issue is with those. Because I sort of found that sort of hard to understand why they would be.
I think it's because of what I was saying before about the birth gender, that they're
because they
binary gender, because gay and lesbian don't have to cross that line of binary gender. They're still male and they're still female. They're not somewhere in the middle. They would still identify, but not most of them, perhaps, I'm not saying all of them, would identify as a female lesbian or a male homosexual, gay. So it's not the same at all as saying I'm different from my assigned birth gender. And I think that's what the threat is, because it's doing away with binary gender. And that's where, because before we could accept homosexual couples as we know in the patriarchal system, one's dominant, one's male, one's female, that whole role modeling they've just taken from heterosexual marriage, and that's not threatening as much as saying now we're going to go non-binary, and there aren't these, which does away with gender or questions gender, and perhaps questions gender roles as well. So it's much more threatening in that sense than,
when you say threatening,
unknown as well. It's threatening because all of us accept, well, before this perhaps accepted there's male and female, and what your physical biology says is what you are, and then that doesn't determine sexuality with homosexual people. But now with trans, it's just throwing that whole model out, which is throwing people off culturally, I think, more than, and it's throwing gays and lesbians off just as much as it is heterosexual people.
Right, okay. Right, I was really
the biology, and then you go to politics, it's about the Bible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Female roles and having those distinctions, which are
and so they don't fit into anything. Is that what you're saying?
And we're saying it's not binary anymore. It's very fluid, threatening to people because we can't box it and we don't know how to deal with it. And it's
that's what I thought. Oh, right, that makes more sense.
I think we don't understand a lot of it, so that's a threat.
Yeah.
We don't understand why someone's born with male genitalia and wants to be female. We don't have I certainly don't understand it. So I think it's that whole threat of not know the unknown part of it. And the away with binary gender.
Tom?
Yeah, I think so. My aunt, who I was saying, was a radical feminist. She's also a lesbian. She wasn't always a lesbian. But speaking to her, she I think also when we talk about this transgender, I think we might be lumping it all in one box, when I think there's more of an issue of transgender women, so that's men who transition into women. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that nuance. So from her point of view, is more that there's a man who's grown up with this male privilege like all their life, and then when you transition and become a woman, it's like you're expected to be treated the same way as women who've kind of had that disadvantage all their life. And so you get this, let's say now there's some sort of reparations, if it's equity or whatever, you've gone from having male privilege to having this equity when you haven't had the same experiences as they have. And so I think from my point of view, I think that's also a place where a lot of this anxiety is coming from, the fact that, I suppose, we have feminists, we have the feminist movement. We don't have almost an equivalent of male, because male have had the advantage all the time. So feminism is trying to level the playing field, balance it out. So in the same way, I think when you look at the transgenders, the problems I see more is it's not really women transitioning to be men, it's more men transitioning to be women. And I think that privilege that men have had throughout their lives is part of that issue that I see feminists and lesbians and so on and so forth have. You know, and this is what my aunt explained to me.
That was interesting. Yeah, that is true, actually. Yeah, because it's more to do with men trusting into women, isn't it? Come to think of it. Yeah, go on, Emma, sorry.
Tom, you said that there's the feminist movement, but there's not an equivalence for men. Do you not see that? I don't know how you view what feminism is, because to me, feminism and the equivalency is patriarchy. And obviously, you probably see it differently to say that there isn't an equivalent sort of for men.
Tom?
Not really. I don't think that was the point I was making or saying anything like that. It's more like, you know, there's civil rights. There was like civil rights for white people. I suppose I was talking about just the movements and kind of what they're standing for. Not to say not to say that there's not the essence of what feminism is. I think that would be missing the point I was making.
Right. Does anybody want to add anything else to this? I mean, those are the points I wanted to bring out today.
On the back of that point about the trans men transitioning to women, I was thinking that's probably because it's more a threat to the patriarchal system, because men are transitioning over to women. And that it's the same. It always seems to be that gay men get much more abuse than lesbian women, because it's okay for women to be lesbian, but it's just not acceptable for men to be gay, because it's a whole threat to that masculinity, toxic masculinity, Apis Ball kind of, I don't all these things that the man is the, you know, you can't have feminine traits, which is what they assign to gay people. So because it's all to do with patriarchy. So now when men transition to women, that's like insulting to the whole patriarchal system, as well as the threat physically, obviously, because of the sports argument and the criminal argument. You know, it was that shooting where the person happened to be trans, and that men are physically stronger and more abusive, and so they're more threatening if they become a woman because they've still got physical strength. I think that's part of it too. But from a psychological point of view, men are always more targeted when they do these things than women are, it seems.
Oh, that's a good.
They don't really care what women do; they care what men do.
No, that's true. That is. I mean, I never looked. You know, when Tom brought that point up, I thought that's true. That is, because they do seem to be targeting men more. It's not very often that you see it the other way around. And I didn't look deeper into that it was to do with Patrick. I think that all makes sense. It's all making sense. Thank you for that, Emma. That really
and Tom's,
I couldn't really I couldn't pinpoint it down, and I don't think I looked deeper into that part, the patriarchal side. I couldn't sort of pinpoint it down. I kept sort of reading over and over it, and I was thinking, what is it that they've been doing? And that, to me, that makes a lot of sense.
And then I think Tom Daisy's written in the chat, the contention with LGB and trans is that they believe it does away with the premise of same-sex attraction.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's as well. It's a good point.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Oh gosh. Wow.
In fact, I suppose it reinforces those gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
Which is what I struggle with as well. I guess that's similar to not so much with the drag, but the drag as well. They dress in very stereotypically women clothes. You know, the whole objectification of women in the makeup and the dresses and everything. The whole high heels, the whole lot is beautification of women. But this doing away with the same-sex attraction is a good point.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's good. Does anybody else want to bring some points up? Because if that's it, we'll end it here. Because I know they're trying to stop it in state school, practice separation. Right, okay. We spoke about that already. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else to add? I think we spoke about trans and understanding what's going on with them, LGBT people and feminists, liberal feminists. We spoke about IDs, what they're trying to target people having because they are trans. We spoke about the First Amendment. Does anybody else have any other questions or discussions that wish to add?
Just one point.
Yeah.
I think we unless we've got some hard evidence, I think we should be careful to make a statement that there are more male to female trans than female to male trans, because I'm not sure what data people have got to say that there's more than one or the other, because it's important to know that, otherwise you can come to wrong conclusions.
Were we saying that there was more males then?
I think a couple of people said it a few moments ago.
Right. Okay. I thought they were bringing up the point that that we're seeing more attacks to do with men transitioning to women. I thought that's the point that was supposed to be brought out. Sorry.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah,
I'm
I didn't say if referring to me, I didn't say anything about the numbers.
I think it was just.
I don't know who said it. I thought there was a suggestion that there are more men transitioning to female.
No.
I think
I think the point was brought out that they were seeing more attacks from male that transitioning to women, and that's the point that we were brought out. We were bringing out. We didn't say that there was more.
I think you said that, Debbie, but I might be wrong. We'll have to look at the recording.
Yeah, I didn't. But I said I was listening to what other people were saying. I said I didn't realise that there were more males that were attacked because of transition to women. That's the point I brought out. And I was listening to what somebody else was saying, but I don't think we did say there was more males transitioning to women than the others. I don't think that point was brought out. It was more to do with the fact that the people who are more attacked are male transition to women, trans in other words. That's the point that was brought out.
Yeah, because I was wondering about the numbers. I think somewhere it was quoting less than 0.5% are trans, obviously, with that more coming out. But I was looking at LGBTQ identified in the US. It says in the last 10 years, it's doubled from 3.5% to 7%.
In what trans? You talk about trans people?
No, LGBTQ that identify something other than heterosexual. So that's the whole range. Because I was thinking, what percentage of the people? It's amazing how such a small percentage are now the focus of such attention. Really, trans people is a small part of that, obviously, but I think a lot bigger than perhaps the statistics are saying. Like they've said, it's doubled in the last 10 years because more people are prepared to come out, I suppose.
I think
exactly.
Trans because of biology. Like it's not a biological. It's a biological thing. That's why they're still against trans. Things are born male or female. It's not.
It's because it's crossing the biology. It's challenging biology. Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
Just on that point about the attacks that are made on trans men versus trans women, I think when we look at it in that way, as seeing trans women as receiving a lot of the violent attacks or legislature, I think it can be easy for us to not neglect but lose sight of the fact that trans women, i.e. trans men, i.e. women that transition to being men, face a lot of discrimination from the patriarchy because they're still seen as women. So they're still recipients of sexual assault. They're still recipients of all the discrimination that women face because they're viewed through the patriarchy's lens as being women. So they still receive that same discrimination.
Yeah, if they do, Curtis, what I'm seeing is that we don't seem to see it more in the news, do we? It's more to do with trans women. So
yeah, my point was just because we don't see it in the news doesn't mean it doesn't exist in such a great scale.
Yeah, and I wonder why that is. I wonder why they don't tend to bring it out more in the news like they do trans women.
The violence that they receive, the abuse that they receive, is the same as they received before. It's what all women receive.
Yeah,
it's not new.
Yeah.
I think that's the point that Curtis was making.
Oh, got you. Right, okay.
And when we talk about even just the numbers, even the numbers may not be correct, because if you attack a man that's become a woman, that would be a newsworthy thing. But the other way around, it's just common day occurrences, so it's not newsworthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think the point that Curtis was making, that even when we talk about the numbers, we have to be careful that we may not even understand what those numbers are actually teaching us or showing us.
Okay, then. I think we're just going newsworthy on that one then, probably. Okay, then. If no one has anything to add, we'll end our Sabbath school here, and we'll have a word of prayer. Okay, dear Holy God, we thank you so much, dear Lord, for the study that we had today through understanding about LGBTQ people, trans people, intersex, non-binary, and the discussions that we've had out of this today has really helped me to understand a lot more than I did before. And so thank you, Lord, for the things that you're teaching us. And please continue to bless the rest of our service now, Lord, as we end our Sabbath school, that we are conscientiously keeping the Sabbath. So thank you, Lord, for the beautiful seasons that we have as well. We've got sunshine out here this morning, and we thank you for beautiful flowers, especially daffodils that are growing where we are. And so thank you, Lord. We've had a blessed week, and it's even more precious when we spend it with you and with others. For we give you thanks and praise in and through our beloved Saviour, always to your great honour and glory. Amen. Thank you, everyone.